Second half of our day 3 here. Now, if you remember, I told you that in 1961 there was a voter registration drive and it basically failed. It failed because the groups were not organized. So lastly, we have another group involved here, and they are called COFO. COFO stands for Council of Federated Organizations, and as you can tell again by the hands, it is a interracial group, and also you can tell it is based out of Mississippi, okay? So, what groups were in COFO? Well, as you can see here, CORE is in it, the NAACP, the SCLC, and SNCC. So we have the projects that of CORE was doing, combined with the law activity NAACP, the Improvement Association, SCLC, and then lastly, the sit-ins and then some local groups. They included voter registration, and the really big thing they had was something called Freedom Summer and organizing the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. So they're really, really important there. And so if you get the groups that are under there, but then also Freedom Summer and Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and we'll kind of move from there, okay? Now, also in 1962, and we listened to this in the notes the other in the class the other day. Kennedy and Governor Barnett of Mississippi are in a telephone conversation, and there's a lot of politeness, but they are upset at each other, and they're upset about a man named James Meredith. Now, President Kennedy said that the governor could not block him from enrolling at the school. Okay. Well, Meredith enrolls at Ole Miss by government protection of Kennedy, and riots ensued. And as you can tell here, 2 people were killed. There was 112 arrested. Okay? So, James Meredith right here is the first African American to attend Ole Miss or the University of Mississippi. Howdy toddy y'all, it's my school. Now, he does so under government protection. And so we have a major question going on here, okay? And that question is, can the government enforce the Supreme Court over, come on, say it with me, states' rights? It comes back again. And so this is another mini Civil War type deal, and James Meredith went through a lot. No, in the end, he is allowed to go in. It's under marshal protection. They make sure he's going around. And much like we had in Little Rock, President Kennedy has to send out troops, and he basically puts the town of Oxford, Mississippi, where Ole Miss is located, under martial law, which is utterly crazy. Now, he did this because Governor Barnett refuses to let Meredith into Ole Miss on the grounds that states' rights are more important than the Brown decision when it comes to education. And there's a lot of things going on there. And so Ross Barnett is also responsible for kind of inciting the riot, if you will. He was at a football game, and he goes, are we going to let these guys in? They came back, and they stood in front of the Lyceum, which at the time was where you enrolled. It's not anymore. It's kind of just a historical landmark. And it kind of got a little crazy there for a little while. All right? Now, so James Meredith is there. So to quickly review, in 57, it happened in a high school where a Southern governor refused to integrate. Now in 62, it's happened at a college. Surely it will not happen, wait a minute, again. Governor George Wallace of the state of Alabama famously gave a speech in which he said, segregation now, segregation forever, and then stepped back into the doorway and physically blocked the admissions hall at the University of Alabama that was trying to, a black female was trying to enter. This scene has popped up in Forrest Gump famously when there's a young black woman who drops her books, and Forrest comes up behind, Miss, you dropped your books. You dropped your books, Miss. Okay? Forrest wasn't real, but this was. He did stand in the way of the door using segregation. Now, in 68, George Wallace will be shot for that very reason. All right? So, Alabama becomes our place of note here in 1963. And so Dr. King decides to march on Birmingham. Why? He wants voter protection. He wants these people able to go and vote, all right? So let's move on and talk about this. So the Birmingham March. Dr. King decides, I'm going to march on Birmingham for voting rights, correct? When he found out he was coming, the sheriff, or the public safety commissioner, I'm sorry, his name was Bull Connor. He made a Jim Crow law, very quick, which is enforced by the police, saying that if you protest, you'll go to jail, okay? So Dr. King comes on, they protest, they throw him in jail. Kids get involved, 1,001 way, they all get arrested. The next day we have 1,000 more. We have some famous scenes of this, and if you remember in class I told you about the 6 principles of nonviolence, and you can see it in this man's face here. He is willing to sacrifice for the cause, and he is showing no hatred towards this dog nor this man. He's showing a little bit of pain, I imagine. And famously from Birmingham as well, they will turn the fire hoses on the people, which that won't kill you, but it really does hurt. You can tell this guy's shirt has been ripped by it. You can see this guy's pants right here has been ripped by the hose as well. Okay? And so that was Birmingham. Now, famously, while Dr. King was in jail, he spent 24 hours in solitary confinement. And there he was contemplating a letter he had received from some other pastors in Alabama saying that he was not doing as God's will, and he was bringing the fight, and that he needed to stop his direct confrontational methods. Dr. King famously said, I can't do that because injustice is like a boil, which is a nasty wart on a witch or something. The only thing to make a boil better is sunlight. If you hide it, it's never going to go away. You might hide it, and it's out of the public eye, but you'll never fix it. So he says all these injustices must be brought into the light so that people will want to fix it. Now, what is he talking about there? The Birmingham things, the Birmingham protests were on TV. And he wanted national people to be able to see what was going on in Birmingham and Alabama and other places. Now, one man who was watching was President Kennedy. And President Kennedy had direct influence in getting Dr. King released from prison. He later invites him to the White House, where they actually start to co-plan a march on Washington in support of a civil rights bill that Kennedy will announce on TV. Okay? So, what is the Civil Rights Bill of 1963 that was going to be enacted here? The Civil Rights Bill of 1963 would basically outlaw segregation completely, but he announced it on TV. It'd be the biggest civil rights legislation they had ever passed. It'd be sweeping, and there would be major changes, and this would be a major victory. Okay? Now, also in 1963, the subject of a movie, The Ghosts of Mississippi, a man was gunned down in his driveway by a white Citizens Council member, and his assassin famously got away. And, he didn't get tried. And so that's the subject of Mississippi. We have Miss Evers' widow here by Whoopi Goldberg. We have a lawyer, and then we have the assassin over here, played by James Woods. Now, in real life, the guy who was the topic of Ghosts of Mississippi, whose death inspired these things, is named Medgar Evers. Now, Medgar Evers is an extreme NAACP activist, very high. He has some doings in the U.S. Navy. He comes home in 1963 after being there with Kennedy and different things like that, and he is shot down in his driveway as he pulls up. Now, they caught his killer, Byron De La Beckwith, and he was a member of a white Citizens Council, and they famously asked him why did he do it, and he goes, I can't have him influencing the president, something like that. Okay? Now, also in 1963, we have another voter project in Mississippi. This one's called the Voter Education Project, and it fails. It fails because many of the people are afraid they could be the next Medgar Evers and shot in their driveway for going and voting. So we've got to have protection of voting rights. That's the major thing, correct? Things that are going on there. So with this all being planned now, the March on Washington occurs. And this was, a lot of people don't understand this, but there was lots of things going on here. Bob Dylan sung, Joan Baez sung. You had President Kennedy speaking, Johnson spoke. And then the big thing, of course, is Dr. King, where he delivers the I Have a Dream speech. Now, they were marching for jobs and freedom, So I want you to get that. The title of the march was "We March for Jobs and Freedom." And it was trying to address the things that the civil rights movement had not achieved yet, which were better jobs and better freedom. Now, famously, this is where Dr. King, in the shadow, or in front of the Lincoln Memorial, gave the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And this will be kind of a turning point in civil rights, because from here, it kind of helps to get things created, okay? Now, Malcolm X really disliked this. He actually called it a farce, which is a fake movement on Washington. And there's a thing in your packet where I had you read that he compares it to a movie, a circus, the Kentucky Derby, and a picnic. Anything but an angry march that was trying to get something accomplished. He said it seemed too purposeful, could be a politician ploy, and so there you have the two sides, correct? Now, why is Kennedy not able to pass the Civil Rights Bill? Well, famously, on November 22nd, 1963, he will be shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. And so the weight of that will fall to his vice president, now president in 64, LBJ. And we'll see how that occurs here in a second. All right? Now, in 1964, the 24th Amendment is passed. It basically said that poll taxes, any method of disenfranchisement, really that was financial, a poll tax could not be legal. Now, it did not do anything about the literacy test. The literacy test is still going on. So this said poll taxes were illegal, all right? Now, in 1963, COFO, CORE, mainly COFO, they'll come down to Mississippi and they'll have what is called Freedom Summer. I think I got it juxtaposed in your paper. I apologize about that. Okay? Now, Freedom Summer is building off of a previous movement. I think I need to go back and talk about this. Then in 1961, CORE had what they called Freedom Rides. And this is where buses left Washington, came down to Alabama, and by means of civil disobedience and economic protest and everything all put together, helped to achieve unity. Now, famous, there was a bus that was caught on fire in Anniston, Alabama, but it was overall a success. Now, in Freedom Summer, back to this, 2 years later, what we have here is there's two purposes in Freedom Summer. Number one was to register to vote, African Americans, and number two was to end the literacy test. Okay? So let's talk about how they accomplish this. The first thing is they end the literacy test by teaching people to read and write through what they called freedom schools. And then lastly, they're going to have major registration drives trying to get people protected. But again, they're really afraid. And they become even more afraid because 3 of the workers disappear in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And now what you can tell is 2 of them are white. One was black, one was Jewish. They disappeared, and they will be lynched and killed by a Klansman down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And so they pop up on that page 20 of your packet of martyrs of the civil rights. Okay? Now, one thing I did say, remember, COFO, they organized Freedom Summer, but even more importantly, to get people to register to vote, they create their own party. And the party was called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the MFDP. Okay? Now, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the big thing if you're a political party is to be heard by the overall Democrats. So, in 1964, led by Fannie Lou Hamer, they will go to Chicago Okay, they will go to Chicago, and they're going to be there, and we'll get that here in a second. All right, so Fannie Lou Hamer, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, it was to be heard by the Democrats. Now, Johnson kind of gets a little paranoid here, if you will, and to prevent this thing from becoming an issue, because remember, he has to run for president in 64, correct? He will sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was basically Kennedy's wording, but he got credit because his name's on the dotted line, right? This is the biggest Civil Rights Act we have. It basically said separate but equal in society is wrong. You can no longer segregate. And now there's a major moving thing about that. We'll get here in a second. Now, Johnson did this because he thought the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party would not come to Chicago. Well, they do. And this rains on Johnson's parade, if you will, because instead of talking about Vietnam and how he's going to escalate the war and defeat communism, he has to deal with the lone kind of rogue African American party that's going through things there. So it kind of throws a damper on him. Now, the last thing here is that in 1964, Dr. King will win a Nobel Peace Prize for helping to promote the Civil Rights Act of '64, because people think that, oh, it's just America segregated. No, tons of countries in the world were segregated up to this point. And so after Dr. King, stuff starts to fall in Australia and England and France. Now, it doesn't fall in South Africa just yet, but Nelson Mandela is really, really inspired by this. And if you've seen Invictus, you know what I'm talking about. And so this is one of the times that Dr. King was nominated, but it is the only time that he will win, and it was for that Civil Rights Act of '64. Now, the next videos will deal with the end of this, kind of going into more modern